And I welcome everyone to Press TV's News Review program, where we get in depth in one of the day's top stories. Let's go. The U.S. president says Washington may cut off all its ties with Beijing over China's response to the coronavirus.
We could do things, we could cut off the whole relationship. Now, if you did, what would happen? You'd save $500 billion if you cut off the whole relationship. Look, at what point does it, and I said this for years, I said
Donald Trump noted that he's very disappointed with Beijing, adding that he didn't wish to speak for the time being with his Chinese counterpart. Trump also stressed the coronavirus pandemic can affect the U.S.-China trade deal. Following Trump's comments, Wall Street's main indexes fell amid renewed fears of prolonged trade tensions between the two countries. Trump has accused China of concealing the true scale of the COVID-19 outbreak, a claim Beijing has strongly denied. Joining us now for this news review is Frank Emspak, former executive producer with Workers Independent News, joining us from Madison, Wisconsin, and Marcus Papadopoulos, editor at Politics First, joining us from London. Gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you both to the program. I guess we'll start there with you, Frank, in Madison, Wisconsin. Pleasure to have you on. Frank, can Donald Trump carry through with this threat? Could he actually cut and sever all ties with China?
Well, it could be, except the Chinese are holding several $100 billion of debt in U.S. Treasury bonds, so I don't see how that could really happen. That's aside from the fact that every major American corporation has major investments in China and probably does not want to see them confiscated or lost in some fashion. And then there's, of course, a treaty that we've just signed. So I suppose, in theory, you could do it, but in practice, it's impossible, and it would really have such devastating effects, not just on these major companies, but on things like the bond market, the Treasury Department, and the ability of the United States to borrow money in the future. So I don't think it's really possible, but I do think what is going to happen is an increasing number of verbal and other attacks on China, attempts to get rid of the Huawei company, the Chinese phone company, make it very, very difficult for them to function. The problem with this is that China is the second largest economy in the world, maybe the largest. They have a huge invested base already in education and training engineers. There's, even a few years ago, more than half of the engineers at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, our premier engineering school, were foreign students, many of them from China. So it's not something that you can just push them around. It's only a matter of time when each of the major areas of scientific importance will have a significant, if not dominant, position by the Chinese. So it's not something you can just go do, and it's not like 1900 or something like that. And I'm not sure Trump understands that.
Thanks, Frank. And Marcus, I'd like to welcome you to the program here. Now, Marcus, time and again, Donald Trump has made it sound like the U.S. could hit China without China having the strength to hit back, or hurt China financially, where China just doesn't have, the same kind of firepower to hit the U.S. back financially. A lot of people feel, a lot of critics feel that is not the case. Where do you stand on this?
Is it possible that America could sever ties with China? Yes, it is possible. After all, anything is possible in politics, but in this situation, it is highly improbable that America would sever its relationship with China. After all, in the event of Washington doing so, that would constitute close to economic suicide for America, because the Chinese market constitutes an enormous market for American companies. Indeed, American companies have a huge foothold in China. For instance, Coca-Cola. Then there is American investment in China, which brings about an enormous amount of revenue each year for America. And then we have vast Chinese investment in America. Chinese investment in America results in 2.6 million American jobs being dependent on that Chinese investment. So in the event of America severing ties with China, we would see instantly, overnight, 2.6 million Americans lose their job. That would result in an instant recession. And then American companies, which, as I said just now, have a very, very substantial foothold in China, would suffer instant, massive losses in their revenue because that market would no longer be accessible to them. You know, any rupture in relations between America and China would have a grave impact on both of the economies. And I submit to you that a rupture, a major rupture in economic relations, in political relations between Washington and Beijing would affect China all the more so. But nonetheless, it would have a very, very detrimental impact on the American economy. So yes, it is possible America could sever its relationship with China, but in practice, it is highly, highly unlikely.
Thank you, Marcus. And Frank, why is it so important and so imperative for Donald Trump to basically, make China the boogeyman in all this? We know most probably this pandemic started there in Wuhan. That's where everything points to. But of course, I mean, I highly doubt that it was actually, some kind of orchestrated pandemic created by the Chinese for any kind of political or whatever objective. Okay, so basically it goes, the origins may go back to Wuhan, but Donald Trump, he obviously has a base there on Fox News. He has a base there, his voter base that he has to appeal to. But how much of it is credible of Donald Trump blaming the Chinese for this?
Well, I think this is all part of the election. He doesn't want to take responsibility for the virus, the disorganization of the response in this country, the 83,000, I think, as of today, deaths, the fact that the virus is still spreading and increasing in amplitude, and the deaths are going to go up. So this is a standard operating procedure in American politics. For years, we blamed the Russians. The Cubans don't work because they're too small and didn't have the virus and have a better health system than we do. So you can't really blame them. So we might as well blame the Chinese. And he's been on that from the word go. And the problem is, I think for him, is that when he does this, then all these economic issues come up. And the Chinese don't like it very much. And a lot of people get very nervous about it because all these kinds of threats and, flag waving and saber rattling sometimes get out of control. And we're talking here about a power that can take care of itself now. It's not something that can be somebody that can get pushed around. And there is a whole streak of American unilateralism. It doesn't matter what other people think. There's not enough strength in the rest of the world, unless even military strength, to do much about it. And economically, Western Europe is tied too closely to the United States, even to become independent enough to insist on enforcing the treaty with Iran that it signed. So the United States sort of feels, or Trump certainly feels, he can do what he wants in terms of many things. But targeting China, this is a long thing from 1888 in the United States with the Chinese Exclusion Act, which specifically targeted Chinese laborers coming into the United States. So it was illegal after they built the Transcontinental Railroad, of course. But in any event, this is a long-standing thing here in the United States. Targeting somebody, making a scapegoat, blaming them, and this is an electoral issue. It's nothing to do with intellectual analysis or where the virus came from, and it doesn't make any difference.
And that's the thing, Marcos, because China months back they locked down over 60 million people in Hubei province, including Wuhan, basically shuttered the entire city, all businesses, all people traveling. That's before the U.S. or Europe shuttered one single business or one single flight. So they gave basically the world 2 months of a head start to get our act together. So what's Donald Trump's issue here?
Indeed, but 2020 is an election year in America. Donald Trump will be standing for re-election. So it is only inevitable that he is in the process of electioneering. And what better way to galvanize his hardcore supporters, in particular in the southern states, than by identifying an external enemy, and I say external enemy in quotation marks, than by targeting China. And Donald Trump, by targeting China, not only is he demonstrating that he is a strong leader who is fearless and will take on any country in the world, no matter how powerful they are politically, economically, and militarily, but it is his way of saying that China, which he has said for some time now, does constitute a threat of salt to America, and he believes that China is responsible for COVID-19, and he is going to demonstrate to his grassroots support, but also to the wider American public, and in particular the American electorate, that he will take on a country that, in his view, has caused damage to the American economy and has caused the deaths of numerous Americans because of COVID-19. We have to take his comments in the context of the American presidential election this November. Donald Trump is electioneering, and I don't have any doubt or hesitation to say this, that if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, she would most likely be carrying out a very similar strategy in relation to China that we see Donald Trump embarking on now.
All right, gentlemen, time has gotten the better of us, but I want to thank you both for joining us on this program, and do stay safe. Frank Imspack from Madison, Wisconsin, and Marcus Papadopoulos joining us there from London. And viewers, that's a wrap for this segment of your Press TV's News Review. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.